Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. President Baker, I'd like to turn to you first. A few minutes ago, my colleague, Senator Hawley, asked you a couple of questions related to Riley Gaines. Now, Riley Gaines was here just a few months ago. She testified in front of this committee at another hearing about how the NCAA discriminated against her when she was required to compete against a biologically male athlete, Leah Thomas, and also required to share changing facilities with that same biologically male athlete. Another female swimmer, Kylie Alons, was so uncomfortable being required without advance notice to share changing facilities with a biologically male competitor that she went and found a supply closet instead. Now, when Senator Hawley asked you those questions, you demurred, noting that those occurred before you came on as president. I understand that, and I look forward to those sorts of things not happening. But I think it's still relevant for us to ask what's been done about those. So I'd like to know, first, have you apologized to those female athletes and any others similarly situated for the trauma that was inflicted on them as a result of those decisions by NCAA?
Again, Senator, I'm not going to speak to or defend what happened in 22.
That's not my question. I'm asking whether you've apologized.
I understand that. I don't know. I'm assuming you're asking, we say you mean the NCAA.
Yes.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'll have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you. Tell me what rules, regulations, restrictions, policies you may have put in place to allow these sorts of things from, to prevent these sorts of things from happening in the future.
Well, I can tell you that the standards with respect to participation for trans athletes in women's sports have been adjusted since then and continue to be adjusted based on conversations with other governing bodies. And again, I'm happy to put that to you in writing, which I think would be helpful.
That'd be great. Separate from the issue of competing, what about the question of sharing changing facilities? Do you have policies that you've adopted since then that address that particular issue? Is there a means by which female student athletes are allowed, number one, to know in advance of when they might be required to share changing facilities with a biologically male student athlete? And number two, after notifying them, you have policies and procedures in place to allow them to make alternative arrangements for changing facilities.
Our policies with respect to the safety and security of student athletes participating in our championships is pretty explicit about making clear that student athletes should not be forced into uncomfortable situations. I will confirm that that would involve situations such as the one that you're raising here. And again, I'll get that to you in writing.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jones, I'd like to turn to you next. As a former student athlete at Ole Miss, when you played for my colleague, Coach Tuberville, you weren't allowed to receive any compensation. Players now are allowed to profit based on their name, image, and likeness, which can lead to great benefits for the student athlete and for collegiate athletics more broadly. For example, because of NIL, some players may choose to stay in college longer, allowing them to showcase their talents and at the same time pursue degrees instead of leaving early to go play in the pros. The University of Utah football team has recently arranged for their players to get leases on trucks, all of them driving the same truck, which I know a lot of them enjoy. Can you speak to the role that collectives play in NIL and their role going forward?
Yeah, and thank you, Senator, for your question. As I explained to Senator Blackburn, I think the role of collectives has evolved the last 12 years, and thankfully so for the student athletes. Again, what may have been started just as an organization to write a check or to compensate an athlete has now turned into a resource that provides tools, transparency, in an area that didn't have any. And so, we got to remember, too, that these student athletes, this is a new environment for them. This is something that they've never experienced, 18, 19, 20-year-old kids and their parents. And they're trying to navigate. Sometimes it's overwhelming to make sure that they don't do anything that would preclude their eligibility, would inhibit their eligibility. And we have taken the approach at our collective at Ole Miss, but the other collectives in our association, about trying to make this just as much about development of the student athlete. Financial literacy is really important. Being a tax-paying citizen, understanding that when somebody pays you the service that you need to provide and the obligation that you are owed. And all those things speak to making them more functional members of society when they leave our campus. So again, I think collectives have evolved to create a structure where we can provide guidance, we can provide resources, we can provide knowledge, and we stand ready, as I've said in my written testimony and today, to have governance, to have oversight, to have a federal standard. We share ready to work with all our colleagues up here on this panel and with the government where necessary, because Senator, we're lucky enough that we deal with the athletes every day. We're in the trenches with them. We're in the realities. And we just don't buy into all the negativity that you hear. Are there some things that need addressing? Absolutely. But overall, the impact that NIL has had in the health and well-being of our student athletes has been overwhelmingly positive. We see that with our student athletes. We see them to develop their maturity level. And again, I think if we're doing our part, we can provide really transparent and tangible detail to all the stakeholders so we can provide the necessary guidance and make the most informed decisions going forward. But I do think we are much more about development than we are just compensation from the last 12 months.
Thank you. And I appreciate all that you and folks like my friend Russ Skousen do for student athletes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thanks, Senator Lee. We've been joined by Senator Manchin, who's done a lot of work in this area. I'm going to give him the opportunity to make a statement, and then I'll have a few closing questions